Hydration. We are live. Apparently we are live. I'll go ahead and start this thing up so you guys can kind of see what's going on. It's Mr. Brule, the legend. This test was run on, I'm going to go ahead and stop it here. Let me get a little bit closer look. One of the things that a lot of guys ask me is, or the comment that I get, I put videos up on the Destroke motor. You know, let's put the 4.8 crank and stuff because, you know, they like to rev. So we did that. This was an LS3 block. We put the 4.8 crank in it. We put longer rods in it and put custom pistons in it. And they were, it looks like they I think if I remember right, they were a flat top with valve reliefs in it. And so we ran this Destroke motor because, you know, all the Destroke guys, oh, you got to get that short stroke crank in there because they like to rev. And we did. We ran it to 8,000. But it didn't do that because it had a short stroke crank in it. It did that because it had the right valve train in it. But the question invariably is, hey, did you run that with a turbo? That, you know, again, the Destroke motors, magically, they like turbos. No, every motor likes turbos. The big ones, the small ones, the medium-sized ones, all of them like turbos. And this was no different. And what we did was we did a comparison between an LS9 camshaft and a BTR, like a stage 2 turbo cam, which again, neither one of those cams would be the ones that I would pick for this combination, unless you were trying to run like with that stage 2 cam. It works very well. It's a good turbo cam. He's sold a lot of those. And if you want to run RPM, which this motor certainly could, again, not because of the crank, but because we had really good cylinder heads on it, and we had that camshaft in it, which is like a 226 at 50, and we had a high ram in it. So it was ready to do all the things that it needed to do in terms of RPM. And so if you wanted to do that, you certainly could. You could also configure it so that it makes, you know, more power down low and is more responsive, and you could pick the turbo sizing for all of that. So you could make this thing do whatever you want. Because the other way to look at this is not that this is a Destroke LS3, which essentially it is. You can also look at it as it's an aluminum block big bore 4.8, which is the direction I like to look at it. I think that it's better than a 4.8 because it has more displacement. It has a bigger bore, and if you have heads that can take advantage of that, I guess you could. Although, you know, when we're talking about a reduced displacement motor that already had way more cylinder head than it needed for the bigger displacement, when we reduce the displacement, now it just has way too much cylinder head on it. Not that there's a such thing as that, but it has more cylinder head than it can ever use. It can't utilize a ported, in this case, it had trick flow LS3 heads on it. And we also, airflow research, LS3 heads, all of those good heads. If you have a head that flows 350 or 360 or something, and you have it on a motor with a 4.8 crank in it, you don't have enough motor for that. Even if you run it to the moon, there's, you know, are you going to make, like if you were running at NA, are you going to make 700 plus with that motor? I mean, maybe you could, but it'd be at really, really high RPM to be able to do that. Frosty cold beverage. But, and we'll keep going on this. So we did run it with a turbo. And we'll go trick flow heads, high ram. Here's the question. Here's what I want to ask you. I'm going to go to wide. I'll go to full screen on this if we can. Full screen layout. Okay. Let's go to our big screen here. There we go. Okay, so hopefully you can see it as a full screen. So my question for you guys is, I want you to look at this photo, and maybe hopefully you're seeing that and not still seeing me. What is wrong with this photo? What is the mistake that I made here on this turbo motor? Let me know what you guys think. What is a very obvious problem here? And so that you guys know, I didn't really care about it. It didn't bother me one bit at all that it happened. So what do you guys think is the problem with that photo there? What mistake did Richard make on the turbo motor? You guys can, I'll leave it up there so you guys can look at it, and then we'll talk about it. Rattle Can nails it right off the bat. There you go, man. That's it. That's exactly it. So Rattle Can said the turbo drain, and that's exactly what I was talking about. Some of it's hidden in this photo down below the line, the progress line. But if you look at the oil drains out of the turbo, goes down lower than the pan, and then comes back up into the pan. So we all know that that's a big no-no, right? You can't have the oil lower than the pan because it doesn't drain into the pan. Or does it? And the reality is that it does drain into the pan. It does drain into the pan because we have run turbos on the other side of the motor, looped the oil drain down under the oil pan, and then looped it back up into the pan. And yeah, there's a lot of oil down in the tube, but when it fills up high enough, which is going to be higher than, it's going to be before it gets to the turbo, when it fills up, it drains into the pan. And this worked just fine. What we did here is I put a little, we put a little stand, and I just zip tied it up to the stand. The reason that I did this, and this is a little background information on what happens, what goes on when we're dyno testing, is that oil drain was used for something else. And so I didn't want to cut it and then not be able to use it next time for that. So we just hooked it up at the length that it was at, and we just have I think it was a barb fitting that we screwed in. We drilled and tapped the Moroso pan and then put a fitting in it and then ran this in there, and it's just a hose knot. There's no pressure there on the return side. It's just draining. So we can just, a lot of times I don't even put hose clamps on. We just push them on. It's a barb fitting, and it secures itself enough and it doesn't leak. So we just elevated the middle portion of that hose a little bit, and just to make ourselves feel better. But like I said, it ran like the way that you're looking at it, ran like that a lot. And so we did some testing here, and I'll show you. We had an intercooler on it, an air-to-water intercooler. We were monitoring charge temperature before and after the intercooler, and we were monitoring boost pressure. And I think that there's a photo here that I showed where we were monitoring back pressure. This was a precision turbo that we did. And this is the power difference between the LS9 cam, factory cam, and the BTR Stage 2 cam. The BTR Stage 2 cam made more at the same booster. And actually, the reality is that when we put the BTR Stage 2 cam in there, the boost dropped. So this is making more power than the LS9 camshaft. I'll show you. The next slide here is going to be the boost curves. But the one thing to note here is that even though that Stage 2 TurboCam is quite a bit bigger than the LS9 camshaft, even down low, like the turbo response is way better. This is not way down low, but this is like 3,500. But the torque down there and down in that area is way better with that Stage 2 TurboCam because the LS9 cam is notoriously soft down low. It's a positive displacement blower cam. It's a factory positive displacement blower cam. So it was designed to do lots of things, and one of them is not make a whole bunch of power down low. Probably to stop detonation, because it had a positive displacement blower on it. They wanted to enhance the thing out at the top. And you can see, in comparison with this cam, with the Stage 2 cam, it's relatively speaking a little better on top than it is down low. And it's pretty typical of that kind of camshaft. And then if we keep going here, we can see this is the boost curve. We didn't have a electronic controller on this. So we dropped like a little less than a half a pound, let's say. So it's not a ton, but it's enough that it would make a difference in power. Because if you're talking about, 30 horsepower per pound, it could be another 15 or something. So I just wanted to include that data in there. And it's like good stuff. Brule posing. Actually, he's posing with the GT45 turbo, the one that we use, that precision, the 7675, showing the cam swaps, taking all the exhaust off with our headers and our Y pipe, our oversized Y pipe, our 3-inch Y pipe. We did have our Y pipe did have wastegate priority. It's pretty good stuff. But I didn't like the headers because they're just kind of a pain to run. These seem to be better than, I think that these might have been the Hooker ones and not the early DNA ones that had a problem with wanting to burn plug wires and plug access and stuff. So it's not a very good deal. Let's see what you guys got going on. I want to build one of these with LT heads on LY6 block. Yeah, I don't recommend that. In my opinion, and you can take it for what it's worth. I think that's a terrible idea. LT heads on an LS motor don't gain enough to go through all the things that you have to go through to do that. Because it's not just a head swap, it's an everything swap. You have to have a custom cam, you have to have the LT rocker assemblies, you have to have different push rods, you have to have the LT valve covers, you have to have an LT exhaust, you have to have an LT intake manifold. Once you put the LT heads on the LS motor, none of the front accessory stuff fits anymore. So you have to plug the DI holes if you're not going to run direct injection, obviously, with an LS short block. You have to plug those holes. You have to run port injection. So it's just not a beneficial thing. There's nothing that the LT heads give you that you couldn't get from decent LS heads, of which there are 30 or 40 different available sets out there. Lightning Lash, yep. How expensive is, I'm sure you don't mean dunk testing. I'm sure you mean dyno testing. You could contact the guys at Westech and find out. Not much getting into the valley. What heads do you recommend for an LM7 turbo setup? The ones that you have on your motor are the best ones. You got to tell me, as always, tell me how much power you're trying to make, and then we can kind of figure things out. Eric, I've been sick. I was going to email Jimmy tonight or tomorrow morning, wait for further instructions. Okay. We just got turbos in stock. We got a bunch of G42s now, which is a really good turbo. In fact, I'm going to do a video, hopefully putting it up tomorrow, on basically the testing that we did. And so if you, there's lots of data. There's an endless amount of data here. I got the idea for Destroker from Jackson Stevens build. I don't know who that is. Lower compression, raised compression. Frosty cold beverage. What's the most RPM you ran? We only ran 8,000, I think, on this motor. Turbo drain. Wastegate priorities. We do have wastegate priority. I got it backwards. The vacuum should keep it moving. There's not really vacuum there. In fact, the crankcase oftentimes has pressure in it. Richard, have you tried the BTR Canavalve LT style heads for the LS engine? No, I didn't know that he made LT heads for an LS engine. I know that he makes the he has a new cylinder head out for the LS stuff, but I don't think it's an LT head. Reminds me of an article I read in Hot Rod Muscle Car magazine years ago. They started with the short deck height, small block V8, 6-inch connecting rod, short pistons, and a D-stroke crankshaft. Okay. Yeah, all of this testing appeared in one or more of the magazines. Goal is 10,000 RPM without exceeding 400 feet per second piston speed. The 400 feet per second piston speed is not a thing. If you look at like mountain motors and stuff, and they're way beyond that. Richard, I've been wondering, will you test a $600 Speedmaster centrifugal supercharger one day? I don't have any plans to. LT injectors are expensive. They're really expensive. The direct injected stuff is, but if somebody was putting LT heads on an LS, they wouldn't be running it direct injected anymore. They'd be running it with port injection, and then it's just standard LS injectors. Do you have mirror left to right turbos? We can get them. It just takes a while. Where are these pressure transducers? Which pressure transducers are you talking about? Yeah, that's one of the reasons I haven't done a lot of LT testing is the direct injection stuff. We can't just go throw 80 or 1,000 cc injectors on them because you just you can't do that. And I know guys are getting past that now, but it's not a cheap deal. It's a bit pricey for the fuel side. What is the piston speed of a top fuel engine? 9,500 RPM, 4.5 inch stroke. Yeah, it's the. I remember talking to Kazi about that, and he said, "Well, he said every time we wanted to go bigger, like he's building those mountain motors, the IHRA stuff, and he goes, we keep calculating piston speed, and he goes, after a while, we just stopped doing it. He said it still worked and it still was fine, because people for a long time thought that 4,000 feet per second or 4,500 feet per second, that after that it'll just all explode. He goes, yeah, we did that, and then we did 4,800, and then we did 5,000, then we did 5,500, and then we just stopped doing it. We just stopped worrying about it. We just would connect them all together and make it bigger, and it would make more power, and so it was just good. It was just good to go. What do you know? It was good to go. Keeping the boost the same is a frustrating thing in turbo testing. Look at that, back pressure readings. Yo. And guess what happens with back pressure? As you make more power, you have more exhaust energy, and you have more back pressure. That's what happens, for the people that are wondering. I remember having that discussion with one of the cam manufacturers, one of the cam experts. He said, yeah, I put this cam in and reduced back pressure. I said, well, it also reduced power, right? Yeah, it did make less power. I'm like, yeah. When you make less NA power and you run the same amount of boost, you make less boosted power, and so the back pressure is down. It's like, oh yeah, we didn't think about it like that. I said, yeah, that's what's happening. If you make more power, you have more exhaust. And if you have the same size turbo, the same restriction, the back pressure is going to go up. That's what happens. Stop thinking about it in terms of cam timing. The only way I think you could get around that is by using a VGT turbo. Get around what? Boost response? I think piston speed was an old rule of thumb, but oils and metallurgy have come a long way. Yeah, I think that 4,000 feet per second or whatever, I think that's in some of the books that I have from like the 70s or 80s. I don't think that's a thing anymore. Have you ever tried 8 EGT probes doing offset fuel trims to see if you can gain any power? Yeah, but you wouldn't do it based on EGT. You would do 802 sensors. 802 sensors run in the tubes. We've done that. We have headers that are set up on the dyno like that. And so you can do individual cylinder trims. And I have a video up where we did that. We ran an intake manifold with a carburetor and then ran it with port fuel injection and a 4-hole throttle body on it. We ran it batch fire, and then we ran it sequential. Then we ran it sequential, adjusting the individual cylinders to try to change the power based on the readings that we were getting on the 802 sensors. And it was not worth very much power, but it was worth doing so that you don't melt the motor down. Yeah, those are the ones, Rich. These new heads have a Gen 5 LT layout. Yeah, but they're not designed to go on an LT motor though. They're designed to go on an LS, right? And we run 8 EGTs, or Westech runs 8 EGTs on a lot of stuff, but you're not finding out air fuel ratio from EGTs. You could change the timing and change the EGTs quite a bit. If anything, EGTs is to stop your stuff from breaking safety parameters in the ECU. I just disagree with that. You have such a wide range of what acceptable exhaust gas temps are, particularly under cruise. I mean, we've seen 1,500 under cruise, and because that's what happened in my Mustang. So I don't rely. What I look at on EGTs is we would like them to be all comparable. You know, you want them to be ideally the same. You'll never get that because you won't ever get an intake manifold that's the same and the power production each cylinder is the same, and therefore the EGT is the same. But we make sure that it helps us tell us if we have a dead hole, for instance, or if we have an uncooperative one, but it doesn't really help us in tuning stuff. C16 or E85, which makes better power? I would pick, I think I would pick E85. If you ran them both below the threshold of the maximum boost that you could run on either one of those, the E85 is going to make more power. I don't know ultimately, given the change in octane between those two, which one of those you could ultimately run more boost on. But I still would go with the charge cooling and the extra power for the E85 for 99% of the stuff. I've heard sequential is mostly effective, low RPM for better idle quality. It's better for fuel mileage, certainly, but much better than batch fire is. And so, because otherwise you're wasting fuel each time. So if you only fire the one that needs to fire, only provide fuel for that one, you're going to use less fuel at any given combination. But most of them don't go to sequential all the way through the RPM range. No Richard tonight? Yeah. Oh. There we go. Now we're unmuted. I don't know. I don't know that Brian said that he sent one. Brian from Summit said that he sent one, but I haven't seen it yet. I have a pretty good idea what it's going to do. Rattlecan, what do you mean by an OEM stroker kit? How do I calculate rotor speed with pulley changes? Rule of thumb, I'm trying to math out an AMR 500 on something funny. Well, on an AMR blower, since there's no step ratio on an AMR, right? Isn't it 1-to-1? So the rotor speed on an AMR, like a positive displacement blower, there's no internal step ratio, I don't think, on an AMR 500. So it's just the pulley ratio and RPM. So it's just RPM times whatever the change in pulley is. Do you have a 2-to-1? Like, do you have a 6-inch pulley and a 3-inch blower pulley? That's a 2-to-1 ratio. And so it's spinning twice as fast as whatever the engine speed is. Ellis crank, 6.2 block, stroker rods and pistons. Yeah, but the LS7 crank is not a good crank to put in there because it's longer and it's designed to work with a dry sump setup. It's much better just to put a 4-inch stroker crank from an aftermarket one. It's much less of a problem. Yeah, we're minimized now. Have you tried a Holley HP versus, say, a Motec to see if power is the same? It would be exactly the same. All of those ECUs will be able to give you the timing and the fuel that produces power, that produces optimum power. You could do that with a carburetor and a distributor, really. So it's not that big a deal to do that. That's not why you buy an ECU. You buy an ECU for other things, for lots of channels, traction control, all kinds of other stuff that it allows you to do. Once the duty cycle approaches 100%, there's no more sequential. Injectors wide open. Yeah, they get to be static and they're open all the time. And that was a lot sooner when a guy showed me the math on that way back. that happens a lot sooner than I thought. Do you have any videos doing a D-stroke LS engine? The one that you're looking at right here is a D-stroke LS engine. This one right here is an LS3 block with a 4.8 crank. And this one was run with a turbo. So Thomas, you came the right night, because that's what this is. So I'll show you. This is a turbo test we did on, this is an LS3 block with a 4.8 crank and a long rod and custom pistons and CNC ported trick flow rec port heads and a high ram and a turbo. And we ran 2 different cams. We ran a BTR stage and headers on it and stuff, and an intercooler. And we ran an LS9 cam and a stage 2 BTR cam, and they made good power. So yes, I have done that. How good are 862 heads against other heads for boost? Let's not answer that question. They're fantastic, but let's ask you, how much power do you want to make? The ultimate stock bottom end combination. I don't know what you mean by that. Is that a question, or is it a Camaro LS7 crank longer as well? I thought the only Corvette had the dry sump. Did they ever put an LS7 in a Camaro? I wasn't familiar that they did that. I thought that was a Corvette only. Trying to make it slow down from 1 to 1. I saw a functional 196cc build with an AMR 300 and a draw through. I'm going to use a 500 in a similar way. Yeah, you can slow it down with pulley ratios. You can if you put a smaller crank pulley on and a bigger blower pulley on, you can have it sped. You can speed it you can run it at less than engine speed. Was the Z28 or something? Was that an LS7 powered deal? I'm late to the show, but this setup looks promising. You're trying to break stock bottom end records. I don't. Yeah, just explain to me what you're doing. And trying to break a stock bottom end LS record is going to be a tall order. 14 to 15 Z28. Okay. I'd like to see 800 reliably with common upgrades. Yeah, that's easy. You can go. We've run stock 706 or 862 heads way over 1,000 horsepower. So the heads are not holding it back. You get a 5.3 with those heads on it. You put one of our low buck truck camshafts in it. You put springs in it, put injectors in it, put one of our G42 turbos on it and a pump. And then like 1,000 cc injectors, and it's easy. The heads won't hold that back at all. 6 liter with a 4.8 crank. Would you suggest stock rod length, or do you think changing the rod? That changing the rod length is going to be necessary unless there's an existing rod, which I think Summit now makes a rod and piston that you could put in there. But you don't have to worry about rod ratio or anything, just as long as it puts the piston at the right deck height. A couple of Camaros had dry sumps. Z28 was the same as a Z06. I don't know what lean at the back means. Have you done a test to see how much more boost you would need to match horsepower with a stock head versus a CNC ported head with bigger valves, same bottom end and cam? Yes, we have, because I've run a test where we've run ported heads on versus stock heads on a turbo thing. And then if the ported heads gained power NA, then that gain was multiplied by the boost. And so, it would depend on what power level you tested it at. Rod ratio, pistons flip, dimples, yeah. all of that stuff. All of that stuff. Zero gap rings or whatever. Yeah. Yep. All of the stuff. Piston flippers. Even some of the Cadillacs had dry sumps. Didn't some of the LS3s also have that? Ported heads would allow you to make the same power at a lower boost or more power at the same boost. But that wouldn't matter if, like the example that I always use, if you're trying to make 1,000 horsepower and you put 1,000 horsepower turbo on it with stock heads, you're going to make 1,000 horsepower. If you then put ported heads on, you're going to make 1,000 horsepower. It's just going to happen at a lower boost because that's all that the turbo will support. Jim's out here building race cars. It's going to get the Summit Pro LS rods and pistons. Those are good. They look promising. They're priced well. Going to do a 6-liter with an LS3 head set up for boost. Okay. Yeah, I always recommend that people go with the displacement. That you won't be you will be happy that you went with the displacement. LS3 in the Corvette Grand Sport was dry sump, only in the 6-speed. Okay. $1,700 horsepower, crank horsepower, stock bottom end by Squirrel Tune, top fuel hoops, copper gaskets, half-inch head studs, 220. GFS says 38. What has Capizzi or what does he run? I think he's run way more boost than that on stock bottom end stuff. I have an L92 that I'm trying to build, 600 horsepower NA. Any suggestions on accomplishing that goal without stroking the motor? If you get 600 horsepower from that motor, it's going to be with a big cam and ported heads and a higher RPM intake manifold. And if that's what you want, you can do that. But it's not like a good daily driver, though. It's a lot better driver with a smaller cam and more displacement. Because 600 on a 6-liter, even 600 on a 6.2 is, we can get like 550, 575 flywheel with headers and no accessories and stuff, and then with a good size cam on an LS3. But to get over 600, you got to have all the other stuff too. Thomas, you got to tell me what kind of, I don't know how much, you got to tell me what kind of power you want to make and what you want to do with it. My buddy gets 30, 40 passes with a stock 5.3 bottom end, Gen 4 rod, 1,200 wheel horsepower. Usually only bends one rod. Yeah, 1,000 horsepower stuff seems to last a long time. 1,200 wheel horsepower is getting up there pretty good. Should sell kits on your site rated for 600 to 800. We have turbos for that already, but we won't ever sell kits because I won't ever design turbo setups for specific chassis applications. But turbo big block, non-air cooled, 525 pump, E85. How do you feel about cooling the air with jets, pre-compressed, tied into the pre-existing E85 fuel system at each turbo? What are you injecting into there? Are you injecting fuel into there, or are you injecting water into there? What are you injecting into there? And you should run an intercooler. Scott, what's going on? Maybe you should talk more often about total horsepower gain, not peak, like a calculation of the total area gain between said RPM range. Yeah, Oliver, if only I did this and showed you a graph where all of the gains are. That's why we talk about that. That's why I do graphs, because it shows you, look, it didn't just gain. I very rarely do I talk about peak stuff. That's why I show a graph, because a graph is a much better representation of, hey, look, we gained a whole bunch of power down at 3,500 RPM. We also gained power at 45, 5, 55, 6, 65, 7, all the way out at 7,000 RPM. A graph tells you all of that. What cam would you recommend for the 6-liter with LS3 heads and a turbo build? It will be a daily driven Silverado looking to make 600 wheel horsepower, but capable of making 800 if needed. You should run our low buck truck camshaft. I wouldn't put, unless you really want to, I wouldn't put LS3 heads on it. I would just take an LQ4 and put one of our cams in it, and springs and injectors and a G42 turbo, and then you could go from 600 would be very few pounds of boost, and then as much as you wanted up to 1,200 would be just at your beck and call. You don't need LS3 heads to do that. In fact, the LS3 heads will be less responsive down low than the cathedral heads would be. They will work, and they will make ultimately more power at the top, but the turbo is there to do all of that. I know you have turbos. I mean, X turbo, X injector, X cam as a kit. Oh, okay. Selling my 06 4-door Silverado 4.8 rebuilt 460. Also have an LSXR 102, but I was thinking about going with a 92mm throttle body because I've been told that 102 would cause drivability issues. It won't, as long as the tune is correct on it. I didn't remember, Ricky, if you're blowing through it. If you're blowing through it, you don't need the bigger throttle body. If it's an NA thing, then I would use the bigger throttle body. I have an LQ9 with 317 heads, looking for 1,000 horsepower with the big turbo. Kind of keep the 317s. Yes. Take that motor, put springs on it, put 1,000 cc injectors on it, put one of our cams in it. Either one of them will easily get you to more than 1,000 horsepower, and put a G42 turbo on it, and you will be on your way. 85 from the fuel system referenced at fuel PSI sprayed pre-turbo. So you want to spray fuel into the turbos, and you're wanting to do that for charge cool? Everyone sells shirts and stickers on their website. We do have shirts, because that was one of the first things that I did. I don't have any stickers. I only have, right now we have 2 turbos, because I don't want to have 15 or 20 or 100 different turbos. We have an 800 horsepower turbo, which actually is rated at 950, and then a 1,200 horsepower turbo. The week is going good. We're just starting, right? It's like Monday or Tuesday, right? Yeah, Tuesday. L3 heads and intake are cheaper than getting 243 heads and a fast intake, unless I did 243 heads and say a Trailblazer SS and a 90. Thomas, you just need 317 heads and a truck intake manifold and a low buck truck camshaft. The turbo does all the heavy lifting. You don't need any of that fancy stuff. You just need heads, any stock head, intake manifold, any stock intake manifold, but do a truck one, because don't put an LS1 intake manifold on there. Put a camshaft in there, a low buck truck or a truck plus, put injectors in it, put a G42 turbo on it, and making the power will be very, very easy. What's the difference between a TVS 2300 and a 2.9 Whipple, same PSI, and a compound boost system? What are you compounding that with? Are you running a turbo through that? And why would you be compounding something with 93 octane? I got here late and skipped ahead through the video, but the 8,000 RPM destroker just makes me wonder what an 8,000 RPM rec port 6-liter will make. It will make more. Can you guys bolt the trans up to the engine on the dyno? Nope. Nope, not on engine dyno. But if you look, I have videos up of taking the engine off of the engine dyno and putting it in a car and running it on a chassis dyno, so you can see what the power loss is there. But it's not just the transmission. The transmission is only one thing. The rear end and the drive shaft and the tires and wheels, and also the way that the engine is configured and tuned, and the temperature, the way that it goes in a car is different than an engine dyno. We ask some weird questions. I know, that's why we're here, though. It's just car guys getting together, man. In that case, I'll take the 862 heads off my 5.3 and pair it with a Trailblazer SS and send it. Maybe do some port work and bigger valves when I get them cleaned up. Yep, you don't even need to do that for the power level that you're at, but you can. You're not putting 862 heads on an LQ9, though, right? It's an LQ4. An LQ9, you don't want to do that. That's the compression is going to be too high. Southland, I picked up 2/10 at Irwindale doing this and was just wondering if you had any additional tips. What did you, how did you pick up 2/10? What did you do? You sprayed fuel into there? Were you monitoring the charge temperature? And when you did that, did you obviously, if you're injecting fuel in there, you change the air-fuel ratio, right? Starting at 73 Camaro, very nice. My first car was a 70.5 split bumper car. Use an LT4 or Turbo LS. You have a Gen 2 LT4. Those are cool and it would be unique, but Turbo LS, there's way more stuff for it, and it doesn't have the it doesn't have the OptiSpark. I just want to spend money. I get that. Compression too high for pump gas, daily driver, or way too high regardless. Turbo blowing into supercharger, because some people are running big turbos on pump, but they have major turbo lag. Plus with water method, you can get more boost. Okay. You should use a, I'm told here, although I haven't tested it, that you should use a root style blower and not a twin screw for compounding. Why are the fuel injectors on your site make more horsepower NA than 2 bar? I don't know what you mean. Best junkyard LM4 junkyard setup, a reference to a video. I don't know what you mean. What are you trying to achieve, Patrick? My first car in 78 was a 70 split bumper. I do like those cars. I still like those. I was referring to the guy saying LQ9 with 862s. Yeah, that would not be good. Yeah, the compression ratio would be high because he was going to add boost to it, I think. So that was my issue with that. LQ9 and 862s would be around 10.5. I think that you're not even close to what it would be. It's going to be higher than that. An LY6 has a dish piston and with valve reliefs, and an LQ9 has a flat top piston with no valve reliefs. Air, fuel, and boost remain the same. Inlet air temperature drop 40 degrees. Okay. You must not have been spraying very much fuel through there, right, to only get a 40-degree drop? And what was the boost level? That's good stuff, though. I like people with data. Obviously, I'm data-driven. And for some reason, I like writing it down. Where's the poll question? I can't do a poll in this configuration. First car, an Iron Duke 2.5, 90 horsepower. Yeah, my first car was the Camaro, and it was a Rally Sport split bumper with a base 2-barrel 350. So that was pretty anemic. Any thoughts on the Skyline? I do. I have been looking up. In fact, we probably will be talking about it tomorrow, but I did another deep dive into Skyline territory and was reading. One of the things I wanted to find out is I want to find out how much the factory boost level was on the RB25 and then on the RB26. I want to see what is factory boost level, because that's our starting point for figuring out, you know, what kind of power we're getting. I'm trying to deconstruct them and figure out how much power they're making NA. And so the boost level helps me do that, because then I can calculate where we go to. So one of the things I want to be talking about is I went down this rabbit hole of all the stuff, and I was reading about all of the, and I love going back and doing this on new engine families, ones that I don't have a lot of experience with, and listening or reading the conversations that these guys have, because this is why I do what I do. I go back and read this and have people telling other people, oh yeah, you can run, you know, one of the things on those is that they have either ceramic, I don't think they're plastic or composite, I think that they're ceramic impellers on these turbos. And so they're arguing back and forth about what the boost limit is of these impellers before they break. And I know that that's a thing, but internally I can't help but think, okay, these things break at 13 psi or 14 psi. I'm like, is it really a boost thing that's breaking them? Is it a pressure thing that's hurting them? Or is it an impeller speed that's breaking them? And I want to know that. I don't know which one of those it is, but I'm just asking this of myself. And obviously a turbo upgrade would be something that you do. And these guys are talking about, oh, you can run this much boost, this much bar or whatever, this much boost with a stock motor, and then you got to get it tuned. You know, you got to get it mapped. Mapped is the thing that they're talking about. You got to get it mapped, and the stock head gaskets will last up until this boost level, and then you got to get head studs or MLS gaskets or whatever, and then you got to get, you know, head studs at this level, and the whole time I'm in looking through like an hour and a half or 2 hours of this stuff, not once did, and then they were talking about this will all be good stuff for tomorrow, but they were talking about, okay, you can make this much power with this much turbo. I'm like, okay, at least that's in the right direction. But you'll make a whole bunch more with this turbo. You can make, and one of the comments was, and this is one of the things that made me want to shake somebody, is that the comment was that, you know, with the stock turbo, you can make like, you know, let's say you can make this wasn't the number, but you can make 400 horsepower at 15 pounds. But with a big turbo, you can make 600 horsepower at 15 pounds. And I'm like, no, you cannot. And so never was there any discussion on anything that I read. There was never any discussion of ring gap. Oh, the pistons, there was a lot of discussion of the pistons break at whatever this boost level is. And I don't know if that's a tune issue. And then there was a lot of discussion of, you know, bigger turbos make more power per pound of boost. I'm like, there was never any discussion of what the NA starting power is and then what our multiplier is. There's none of that. There's nothing about ring gap. There's nothing about like air fuel and octane and all the things that you talk about on every other kind of, you know, performance motor, but it just wasn't there. And admittedly, a lot of this stuff was fairly old, you know, I don't know, back when these cars were more prevalent or you know, more common. But I just thought it was interesting. And I find that when I go in and jump in with new groups of people on a new engine that I've decided that I like now and want to start testing on it, and we get all of this stuff. The other thing that they were talking about, we'll talk about this tomorrow, is our rod bolts and all kinds of stuff. It was interesting. Have you tried 1.8 rockers on an L77 LS2 standard heads? I have lots of rocker videos up, and rockers, if you're going to change to an aftermarket rocker, you have to put different springs in it, because otherwise you'll get valve float. Rockers can help, and they'll help on I would argue less on a 550 lift cam, which is like an LS2, than they would on a 500 lift cam, which would be like an LM7. And then you just have to try them and see. I don't normally recommend people change rockers on LSs. The LS rockers are exceptional, and we ran stock rockers on the 8,000 RPM deal that you're looking at right here. Stock rockers, just lots of spring rate and the right camshaft and stuff. The first car was a 91 3000 GT VR4. That's a very cool one. How about a trusty Big Bang L96 rec port dyno mill with leaky head bolt threads with enough camshaft for 8,000 RPM? A Big Bang is not an 8,000 RPM thing. 22 PSI at 5 gallons per minute on each turbo. $73. So did you take fuel away then when you added, you know, through the injectors, when you added fuel through the turbos? The getting charge cooling is definitely good. So fuel going through there is not unlike blowing through a carburetor and getting fuel that way, or blowing through one of these throttle body deals. So that definitely works. And then if you can improve the turbo a little bit, that's good. My first car, 73 Camaro Z28. Oh, nice. Currently has Mark 454. Or if it's worth it to buy a junkyard LT4. If so, what gen, or should I find a junkyard LS turbo? You're not going to find an LT4. You won't find any generation LT4 in a wrecking yard. You won't find an LT4 Gen 2. You won't find an LT4 Gen 4, or if there's a Gen 5 version, I don't know. You won't find any of those in a wrecking yard. So, but a turbo LS, you'll find dozens of those. Have you ever tested sequential turbos? Only on a chassis dyno and only stock ones. Can you base it off the NARB power ratings? I can, but I, like always, I don't know enough. We know that an NARB motor is going to have higher compression, and I'm guessing also a different camshaft, and oftentimes a different intake manifold. So we can get an idea, and that's what I was going to do. I was going to compare that versus what I back calculate on the turbo thing, because the turbo is going to be lower compression, so it's going to make less NA power. And so I just was, you know, I was doing a gee whiz thing. I built a stroker LS with 30 over DSS, flat top pistons, 375 stroke. That's a weird stroke length. 62cc aftermarket heads, twin 60s on E85 and a limited 275 street tire class. I've been running high 20s, 20 pounds of boost. That's a lot. I don't know what turbos you have on there, but how much more what? Where would you plumb water meth injection on a positive displacement blower with an intercooler? I don't think that I would use that. I don't think that it's necessary. But if you're, what I would have is I'd have an intercooler between the turbo and the blower if you're doing that. And then I would have an intercooler after the blower if you're doing that. And then on the water methanol injection, because of the way that the blower is working, I don't know that you're going to get that through the intercooler core. If you could make a solid roller cam that didn't need to be adjusted often, I would run that on the street if it was the case. Much better power and sound. Yeah, that's not necessary on LS motors. How much power do you think I could squeeze at 1200 horsepower? I don't know anything about your turbos. I also don't know what your motor is. I've never seen I don't ever remember seeing a 375 stroke crank for LSs. We have 4.8 stuff, and the stock one is 3622. So I don't remember seeing that stroke crank. And I don't know what heads you have. I don't know what camshaft you have. I don't know what, like I said, I don't know which turbos you have, what the intake is. So it's hard for me to gauge what kind of power you would be making on 20 pounds of boost, because I don't know what the starting point is. I have a 2020 Porsche Turbo, 2008 Alpha, 78 Camaro, and an 18 R8. Cool. It's running an 8th at 553 at 124 in a Jeep. Yeah, not the most aerodynamic thing, right? LT4 Gen 5 is CTSV, 6th Gen ZL1. A ZL1's not an LT4. The ZL1's an LSA, right? First car was an A6 Trans Am 6-speed. Still have it, but has an LQ9 6-liter. There you go. Oh, you had to put the stroke in because of class requirements? Okay. Yeah, Southland. No, I get it. The packaging sometimes for intercoolers is problematic. But if you're improving charge cooling there, it works good. Molnar makes a 375 stroke. Okay. Checked it in the runner post intercooler. Yeah, if you can, that would be nice if you could get it like an individual port injection. That's pretty complicated, but if you had to pick a motor to build for boost or NA over a 351 Windsor or a small block 400, I wouldn't pick a small block 400 for boost. I would definitely pick a 351. Did you sell your own? Did you mention you sell your own products like camshafts? If so, can you share the link? Yeah, it's richardholdnerperformance.com is our Shopify store. LSA was a 5th gen Z01. LSA was a 5th gen Z01 and 2V CTSV. We did some Kenny Bell blower upgrades on those. Crowbar, we also have turbos there. And we have dyno results up. I've got videos up on the turbos. We have 2 of them. One is a GTX 3584 RS turbo. That one's good for about 800 or so. It's rated at 950, but on these, like we ran it on a 5.3, 800, it'll go more than that. But that's when people start talking about going more than that, we just push them to the other turbo. And the other turbo is a G42, and that is good for 1200. So wherever you are in your power needs, that's which turbo you pick. You mentioned a header test coming in the future. Can you elaborate more on what you're going to be testing? I don't remember talking about a header test. We did the header test. I already put that video up comparing a tube header to a log style header for a turbo LS. And that video is already up. That's probably that's the only one that I can remember talking about. And the smaller log style manifold, and we tested it on a asymmetrical turbo setup, meaning that we were only running a turbo off of one side of the exhaust on the V8, so that we could isolate exhaust flow and show a bigger difference. And the Fowler performance stuff, the log style deal did much better than the header did. It was much more responsive. In terms of maximum power output, the header probably is the way to go. But again, for what we're looking at, it's, you know, again, if we're looking at like these headers, you'll see this setup on this car, on this motor, is overkill because it has tubular headers feeding 3-inch Y pipe, and it's way more than it needs to be. Log style is better for turbo over all others. No, there's no universal thing like that. In this test on this motor, the log style provided better boost response than the headers did. But if I were building a really, really high horsepower deal for drag racing or whatever, I would have headers on it and not a log style manifold. What have you tested on an LT5? Are you talking about the original ZR1 motor, like the Gen 4 Corvette ZR1? Or are you talking about the supercharged stuff on the later Corvette? Brian Tooley had one of those, and I got to ride in that. That was impressive. I haven't ever tested one of those motors on the engine dyno. They did a bunch of stuff to theirs. They did a big ported blower and heads and cam and all that stuff. And I think it made I don't know. I'm making up a number, but I think it was like 1,200 or something at the tire. Manifolds just don't look as good under the hood. The tubulars look much cleaner. Yeah, the tubulars are probably more problematic for most engine bays, though. What kind of EGTs do you see on a turbocharged motor you speak of? Do you measure them? We don't always measure EGTs. And I don't think we did measure EGTs on this one. We measured back pressure and boost pressure before and after the intercooler and all that stuff. EGTs don't concern me as much as air fuel does. Which one is better, divided or undivided turbo exhaust? That's an open-ended question. There's no absolute there. It depends on what you're trying to do and what turbo you have, and whether it's a V8 or a V6 or a 4-cylinder or whatever. You know, there's a lot of things to think about there. How do you think an LR4 board to make a 302 would rev out to with the right valve train? The displacement has nothing to do with RPM potential. All of that is in the valve train. There's a video on YouTube of a C6Z06 that's destroked. Not sure why he did it, but it made 600 wheel horsepower, revs to the moon, and sounds nasty. Yeah, he's just making less power by making it smaller. That's all that happens. Think about it. Nobody in any class of racing ever in the world, no engine builder, if they tell you, okay, you can run a 3-liter motor, nobody picks a 2.5-liter motor because it likes to rev. They all pick a 3-liter motor and then make it rev, or a 4-liter, or a 5, or a 6. Whatever they will allow them, they will pick the biggest motor that they can. Nobody picks the smaller motor. And this is the same thing. I'm sure I could. I need to go back and look and see on this destroked one if I ran it in a configuration that I also ran an LS3 in. It would be very telling. I mean, I will admit, I'd be the first one to admit that high RPM motors sound good. So when you're revving this thing, and even when I'm at West Tech and listening to other motors that are there that rev high, it sounds cool. I mean, it sounds amazing. But that's not what most people want for, you know, certainly not for driving around. I remember destroking was the thing in the early 2000s. I don't remember that as a thing, but you know, there's no advantage to it. Like I said, it's a bigger motor makes more power. Would the piston speed be a lot better with a shorter stroke and drifting? The piston speed will definitely be less if you change the stroke length. Building fancy headers so it sounds like it's revving higher. Maybe might actually be a thing. Yeah, you can make 180-degree headers or whatever, or 8-into-1s or exhaust or whatever, and make it sound good. But they do sound good. When I mean, like my favorite Formula One stuff are the old V10s, and I like the way that those sound more than all the other ones. And having a motor that runs to 15, 18, 20,000 RPM, whatever they were, that sounds really good. Sounds amazing. But that's not enough reason for me to want to build a motor like that's problematic. Higher RPM engines attract attention. Yeah, the Judds, yeah. I got to work at the 24 Hours of Daytona when the Judds were there, and the Ferraris too. They both sounded different, but both very cool. Yeah, piston speed's not really an issue. It's definitely valve train will break way before piston speed becomes an issue. Got 1 more minute. Front yard, happy to help, man. That's why we're here. We're just car guys getting together, talking shop. Wah, wah. Look at that, yeah. MLS head gasket. L3 block. The C806 motor is eventually going to be in other cars and trucks. It's going to be a double overhead cam engines eventually. We're just going to have to answer soon. So you think they're going the 4-valve route? Turbo-y goodness. My favorite part about all this are all the sensors. The hardest part about putting all that stuff together is always the discharge tube. Getting from the turbo to the intercooler and then to the inlet, because I have to make that custom every time we put one on there. When I went to Le Mans and the NASCAR stock car was there, it made the biggest impact. Pure low RPM grunt, everybody loved it. Yeah, it definitely probably sounded different to all those fancy cars. Happy to help, guys, and I will see you guys. Ford already has a Coyote. Yeah, I know that's already a good motor. See you guys all tomorrow. I got to hit end stream.